we're joined by Jess from our project management team, who's going to tell us a little bit about her role and what she does with our clients at Pixelate. Over to Jess.
Hello, I'm Jess. I'm a senior project manager. So that means that I'm responsible for delivering all the functionality that's in scope, on time and on budget. So I'm the point of continuity for the client all the way through the process, from the consultancy period, all the way through the build, the testing, and then all the way up through to live. And at Pixelate, we practice agile project management, which means that it has many principles, but broadly speaking, it means that we deliver the tech early and iteratively. So we work really closely with our clients to regularly review and refine the solution with you.
So what are your top tips for clients that are thinking about embarking on a digital transformation project?
So my number one top tip in approaching a project would be have your site users at the forefront of your mind. So think about who's going to be using your site, draw up a profile of each of those users, and think about the information hierarchy that each of those users is going to want to see when they hit the site, so that you can make sure that you're providing a tailored experience for them.
And in terms of websites, obviously these days the websites don't sort of exist in a silo. We'll always have an element of sort of CRM and other systems integration. In terms of getting everything all sort of talking harmoniously, what are the sort of things that you come across in projects that can sort of unseat projects? So what are the sort of things that people need to be aware of when they're looking at sort of creating a bit more of an integrated product?
First and foremost, it's important to try to always opt for the most simplistic solution, which sounds like it might not necessarily be the most convenient solution, but actually the less convoluted the solution, the better in the long run, because we find that heavily customized sites are quite difficult or more difficult to maintain. If you want to upgrade or update the technology, it means that dev is having to work around these very specific customizations that you've put into place. So, we practice agile project management at Pixelate, and one of the principles of agile is to always try to keep technical solutions as simple as possible, wherever possible.
And I think that's an interesting one, because I think, as technical people, the temptation is to kind of dive in and say, yeah, for sure we can do that. There's no problem. But I think a lot of the time, we're not thinking about the cost of maintaining that solution in the kind of mid to long term. And I suppose also asking the question of, you've asked for this. Of course it can be done, but how often does it actually happen in the wild? If it's only affecting 5% of our users, or if we're designing sort of iterative principles, MVP, let's design for the 90% and then let's iterate over. So no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I suppose one of the other things I'd like to ask is, in terms of working with different sizes of organizations, obviously larger organizations may have a PMO, they may have their own projects team, UX specialists and things like that. But when you're working with sort of small to mid-size membership associations, how do you think they should prioritize the project, relative to the fact that they've all got day jobs, that kind of thing? How do you work with people to sort of tell people who should do what when, and sort of set expectations around the kind of the peaks and troughs of activity that their teams will have to engage with at sort of set points in the project?
Before you embark on the project, it's really important to think about who's going to support you during the build, because it's not all just the agency building. It does building a platform does require a substantial amount of time from our clients, to put aside that time, building pages, being there, being responsive to the PM. So there's quite an investment there that you need to think about. Ideally, you would have a team around you, and we've seen that usually carved up around departments. So you may have events, you may have finance or marketing, taking responsibility for different parts of the site. So it's just important to think up front who your team's going to be, and what they're going to be responsible for.
And in terms of, I guess, that sort of expectation setting, I mean, I think it's funny, I always remember that client that said, when will you have the website ready for us? As if it was a case of, chucking some pizzas and a couple of bottles of Coke into a room with some developers, and out will pop a website, and their work was kind of reasonably limited. So I think definitely seeing that sort of understanding with clients that they are involved in the process. They do need to test, they do need to validate. Obviously we do testing in QA teams and whatnot, but we do need our clients to validate that what, the solution is going to work for them. I guess in terms of, managing other stakeholders in the business, one of the things I'm very clear on always is that, we're always dealing with people day to day, but people always have their own customers, their own customers internally, be that their sort of senior leadership team or their members, who they need to kind of, manage their expectations. So how at Pixelate do we sort of help the project manager or the consultant client side to sort of manage other stakeholders and sort of keep them abreast of, how projects are going?
So stakeholder management is really key, and I think your PM can be really useful in helping to guide you around that. You can find that if you introduce your ideas and concepts too early, sometimes to your stakeholder group, they might not be able to visualize what you're meaning to do. But obviously, if you go too far down the line, you may have produced something that you haven't then got buy-in to produce. So it's that sweet spot, making sure that you bring people in at key points, and your PM will have seen this pattern, this process through all of the clients that they've worked with. So they're quite useful to lean on to ask for guidance around that. So there are key points in the project that your PM can advise, that you then include your wider stakeholder group.
And in terms of the sort of the dreaded deadlines, I mean, obviously projects without deadlines, are not good, because then there is that things can tend to just drift in terms of if a client doesn't, or a partner doesn't have a compelling event, or they're not really motivated to sort of keep the project moving and get the project over the line, or there isn't sort of a hard deadline.
Yeah.
What's the sort of approach to the sort of sizing of different things and sort of playing back progress, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So I think estimating the length of a project is also really key, and what's critical and what the PM will do on Pixelate side is make sure that there's that buffer there. It's good to keep some momentum and some pace behind the project, because that enables you to kind of hit deadlines and make sure that you get where you need to be. But equally, it's important to have some fat built in, because you never really know until you get into the detail of the project what kinds of challenges that might arise. So yeah, I think planning and a buffer in the timing plan is absolutely critical.
And in terms of timings, obviously the assumption is that we need to make these visuals, or we need to design this technology. But quite often there are some other factors, certainly on sort of CRM projects, where regardless of whether we're delivering CRM or not, in terms of data integration, those kind of things, which we know from surveys are always the kind of things that organizations have challenges with. But if an organization is embarking on this sort of project, and they know their data's a bit ropey, how should they approach sort of preparing for a project, before they start looking at look and feel, or thinking about their functional and non-functional requirements, or their sort of business readiness piece? How should they think about their data, and what do we see there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to get your house in order with the data. It might not be the most glamorous part of the project, but it's really a fantastic opportunity to spring clean that data and get it into shape. So invest some time into, maybe even get a third party to come and dedupe it or to cleanse it. Also interrogate what you've been collecting, because there's often lots of legacy data in old systems that have been sitting about and have always been collected, but nobody really knows what is done with it, in which case interrogate it. And if you don't need it, don't migrate it. Equally, there might be data points that might be really valuable, which you might want to think about weaving into the new project. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to look at what you're collecting and really purge that and make sure that it's strategically sound.
In terms of the sort of process that we go through at Pixelate, obviously we start off very much with that sort of discovery process, of that sort of matching of what the client has articulated that they want versus the sort of the productized offerings that we have, and then going through a sort of a refinement exercise to sort of groom a sort of a backlog of requirements in a sort of prioritized order. But how do clients get involved? So once things have started to be built, when do clients sort of get involved with the project from a sort of more hands-on standpoint? When do we start involving them, either in sort of sign-offs, or when do they start to get sort of to play with the systems?
Well, pretty much straight away, actually. Because we develop things iteratively, we really like to show things off the bat, version 1, and get that feedback straight away so we can start refining and honing it. So one of the very first things we'll do straight after the scope has been written is set up your environment for you, so you can come into your test environment, mess about with it, play around with all the widgets and get familiar with the environment. And then we'll obviously start building, and ideally we'd be working with a key stakeholder. So your PM, i.e. me, would be in regular kind of weekly or more contact with stakeholder on your side, and be regularly demoing things that we developed that week, getting your opinions and feedback on it, and then feeding in your comments for refinement. So it's a really it's an upfront process, and it's all the way through continuously through the project.
In terms of keeping that kind of energy and sort of transformation mindset, how should clients sort of continue to engage with Pixelate or their agency to sort of think about the sort of the development of the product ongoing?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting area, because a website is something that really needs, or a platform is something that really needs to be maintained. So it's not something that you can build and then walk off and leave it for 5 years. There's constantly new technology that we can refresh. Again, the data needs to be looked at all the time and refreshed. So it's something that you should look at, which will need a little bit of investment each year. Mm-hmm. So it's great to speak to your consultant or your project manager and talk about what your long-term plans are for the site strategically, and then you can plan together what kinds of enhancements you might want to make to the site in the coming year or 2 years' time.
Cool. Yeah. So I think the account management piece is really important, and I think also where you have that alignment of if we're having 5 or 10 conversations with different clients. I mean, COVID during 2020 is a really great example about every conversation that was going on with clients was all around virtual events. Everybody wanted to talk about that. So there's often sort of these topical things that come up. Cool. So I think that was really great. It was really helpful to go through. If you had any last sort of top tips, one final one to throw in there, what would that be?
I would just say that planning is key, allowing enough time is key, and also just approaching it with quite an open mind. Be prepared to be collaborative, and be prepared to maybe change tact if something happens along the way. Be prepared to listen to outside of the box solutions, and try not to solutionize. Try to just let the agency know what you want the outcome and the experience to be, and let them design something that will work perfectly for you.
Yeah, that's really great. I think communicate your objectives and your sort of outcomes, rather than this is how I want it to work because I've seen that's how Facebook does it. And I think that's a really good sort of really good final point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex.